Okay, so welcome. There's going to be a kind of British double act here with myself in person and the far more accomplished Susan online chairing this session. This is our first, well, it's not our first hybrid meeting. We've done a number of those beforehand, and it's not, but it's the first big in-person meeting of GA4GH for some people here in Montreal, and it's just wonderful to see everybody here. But it's also great. I've often said to people that the kind of going virtual aspect of an organization, I was sort of halfway there before the pandemic due to GA4GH. And it's wonderful that we embraced being virtual and hybrid before the pandemic, and obviously now it's just going to be part of our life. So there are, I believe, I don't know, Angela, how many people are there online? 65 people online. And hopefully now, at this point, I can't see you, Susan, but maybe you can speak. Can you hear us in the room?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you. Thanks, Ewan.
Woohoo! Okay, so, for the people online, I am very aware that when the conversation shifts into the room, there can be this moment where the room forgets that there are online people and that there are that we have to use microphones and other things. We have throwable microphones, I believe. Is that right? Can we see the throwable microphone? Where is the throwable microphone? It's being prepped. Okay, here we go. We have, okay. So we have mics that you can walk up to and mics that can be thrown. So no one in the room, if you are speaking, just remember there's another 60 people sort of next door, think of them being next door, and they need to have a microphone for them to, you need to speak into a microphone for them to be heard. Angela, do you have another point there? That's right. Okay. So there are, and if you want to come in online, you could just like jump in just by speaking. But as Angela says, it probably is going to work better for everybody involved if you put your hand up, and there are people manning the Zoom screen. So we'll make sure that that people with their hands up can come in to this. Yeah. And it may well be a sensible thing for many of us to log in without audio so we can see chat and stuff like that. That chat ends up being quite a useful thing. Now, I thought about, or I discussed with Angela whether we should go around the tables here, but it's going to take too long, and then we've also got online, and so I think that's going to be wrong. But so I think we should jump in. Reminder that this is the Connect meeting, so it's pretty geeky and pretty hardcore pretty quickly. So that's where we go here next. So with that, I think I hand this over to not Angela, to Susan.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, and I could see you briefly at the podium, but I'm hoping that we are now going to share some slides, which I think is going to happen from the room. Okay, so I can now see myself in duplicate, but I can't quite see the slides just yet. So we have a small number of housekeeping slides just to get us started. As Ewan has said already, this is our first sort of our first hybrid meeting. Although obviously we've had lots and lots of meetings online before, but it is our absolute pleasure to welcome at least some of the participants of this meeting back to face-to-face, but also hopefully to get the best of both worlds by also being able to have a huge number of people joining us online who might not otherwise have been able to make it to Connect. So first of all, welcome to Connect. And if we could move to the next slide, please. So for our virtual participants, those joining online, we have some guidance and some kind of housekeeping stuff to go through. First of all, please do use the video during the breakout sessions. That's going to be the bulk of the meeting. As Ewan said, this is really a working meeting aiming to really get into some of the details. And for communication there, having video on if you can really is a huge help. I kind of smiled when I saw this next one, ensure a good network connection. If you have had any experience remotely like mine, this may have been the bane of your existence over the last couple of years. I'm trying to make sure that you have had a good network connection for Zoom calls, but if it's possible to make sure that you're in a spot where you have good connection, that's brilliant. Please do use the raise hand function to speak if you want to participate or contribute verbally. And when you're not speaking, if you could please look at muting yourself, that would be really, really helpful. In addition to that, we also ask that if it is possible, if you could please avoid multitasking. And also if in the sessions, they're working meetings, if you could be prepared to introduce yourself and to say who you are, affiliation, and inevitably any conflicts of interest as well. And for those, however, who are not online, for those who are there in the real world, we're asking that you come prepared for hopefully informative and collaborative sessions. So moving to the next slide, please. I hope that that actually applies for everybody. In addition to that, though, if you are there in person, please do wear a mask. It's my understanding that there is still a mask mandate in place in Montreal. So if you could please be respectful of that, and other people who may have come from different environments, maybe at different levels of comfort round about being together, that would be really appreciated. Also, we do ask, as Ewan has emphasised already, if you are speaking, please do use a microphone if you're there in person. There's a huge number of people online, and many people will not really be able to hear you otherwise. And we also ask that you please bring a computer or tablet with you so that you can participate using the virtual collaboration tools that will be used in a number of the sessions. So moving to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is our expectations for conduct. They should go without saying, but we're going to go through them in any case. GA4GH does expect that all attendees help us create an inclusive environment. Please be respectful of each other, and please be transparent about any potential conflicts of interest. The following behaviours will not be tolerated: discrimination, harassment, sexual harassment, disrespectful behaviours, or violence. Okay, so moving to the next slide, please. So if we can take a moment now, if anybody wants to get us into practice for what we're hopefully also going to be doing during the working sessions, if anybody has a conflict of interest that they feel they need to declare, we can take a moment now. If people want to, they can share it verbally, or also please do feel free to type it in chat. And I see we have an excellent commentary going on in chat already about the numbers of copies of me that have been available to people in the last few minutes. Okay, so if you do have a conflict of interest, I would ask that you please share it in chat. That would be really appreciated. Okay, so if you could move on to the next slide, please. If you need help at any point during the meeting, whether you are a virtual attendee or you're there in Montreal in person, two best options are on Slack, the questions for Secretariat channel, and then alternatively by email, operations@ga4gh.org. So that's the operations@ga4gh.org email address. They're the best points of contact if you need help with anything. And moving to the next slide, if you're not already familiar with our Slack workspace, there's a link to it here. There's also the option to carry on conversations from the sessions on the general channel. And as we said already, you can also post questions for Secretariat. So moving to the next slide, please. Okay, some of the sessions will also be using Slido for questions. This is one of them. You can find Slido at slide.do. And then when you get there, our event code is #GA4GH. I think most of you will likely have used it before, but again, if there's any difficulties with that, feel free to contact Secretariat. And moving to the next slide, please. Okay, and this is a screenshot of the attendee hub. Probably, I think, if most of you have made it here, you're already aware of the attendee hub. It has hopefully everything that you should need for the next few days. It's got the agenda, it's got the Zoom links to the different sessions, and hopefully all the information that you need to navigate through the meeting successfully. Okay, and the next slide, please. Okay, and a brief copy of the agenda. So the meeting is going to run over 3 days. We have a single track just now. We have the initial updates from the work streams. We're then going to go over to actually one of the I hope all of the sessions are important. I think we have a great agenda for the next few days, but one that would be particularly interesting where we're looking for feedback about direction and strategy. Then we're going to move on to looking at how we build impactful standards. And then the agenda splits up into multiple tracks. You'll see that there's looks to be a gap tomorrow later in the day. Do not be deceived. If you're a member of steering committee, there's actually the steering committee call taking place at that time. And then we're going to wrap up on Friday. So next slide, please. Okay, so now that the housekeeping has been taken care of, it's time for me to say a few opening words. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So the Connect meetings are a great opportunity for us to work together. They really are a chance to actually connect and spend time with colleagues in GA4GH. These are some photographs from one of the pre-pandemic face-to-face meetings, and this one is from Orlando in 2017. And what you see looking at this, or what I see looking at it, is a lot of very engaged people. There are also lots of people, and there's lots of focus and a good number of familiar faces in there. And it's an interesting point in time for GA4GH as well, because going back about 4.5 years ago when this meeting took place, this was just at the point where we had just launched the workstream model and changed the way in which we were working. So moving to the next slide, please. And it was back in 2017 that we switched from what was kind of regarded as phase 1 of GA4GH through to phase 2. And we kind of transitioned from working groups through to having work streams. And we came up with this concept of driver projects and the idea of this intersection, the driver projects providing real world use cases to drive and motivate the work, but with the work streams carrying that work forward. And it's also interesting, I think, to think about, looking back then, what were we focused on at that point in time? If you could move to the next slide, please. I found this slide from early 2018. It's the first that I could find of our workstream firehose updates, of which we are all now familiar, and we're going to have one just shortly. But looking back at where we were at the steering committee meeting of January 2018, you could see that, the Pheno packets, there's a lot of familiar projects in here, but there's also some real differences. Pheno packets back then was aiming to have completed a trial by the end of that year. Beacon was aiming to have completed development work on version 1 by the end of that year. In GKS, they had just identified variation, representation, and annotation as areas of interest. Cloud had got in the diagram on the right a number of different projects, including the doc store version 1, funnel in an early version, and then some other things. We're talking at this stage about DOS instead of DURS. In Duo, they were looking to complete drafts of the atomic terms that would serve the driver projects by the end of the next month in February. And over in LSG, they had just finished adding support, or just reporting back on having added support for long reads in the SAM, BAM, and CRAM format. But if we fast forward from there, we can jump forward to the present day and move to the next slide, please. We can see that Pheno packets, well, not only did they complete that trial, they've now completed 2 versions of the standard. The second one was approved last year. They're also well through the process of ISO approval, and thanks to really a huge amount of work to the Pheno packets team, also doing a lot of work on how that interacts with and integrates with HL7, through things like the implementation guides. And moving to the next slide, please. Beacon, likewise, they've obviously finished version 1. Version 1 is now well established, and indeed the steering committee call here, we're going to see version 2 being up for approval, which moves from the relatively simple, it's not that simple, but simple beacon of V1 asking simply, do you have an allele at a given location, to allowing massively more complicated queries to put to data. And moving to the next slide, please. And likewise, if we look at GKS, where back in 2018, they had identified variation representation as an area of focus. Last year, they published the VERSE standard, which does enable this unambiguous representation of variation. And moving to the next slide, please. And likewise, looking at a bunch of other standards. This is a nice paper by Casaletto and colleagues from a couple of months ago in Cell Genomics. And it's looking at breast cancer gene interpretation, and looking at using DocStore and implementation of the tool registry service to be able to move to be able to move analyses to different locations. So moving to the next slide, please. That's where we've ended up, but what was the direction that we thought we were going in back in 2017? This is a slide from the June steering committee meeting in 2017 that's looking forward, and it's looking forward to this year, and it's talking about where are we going to be. If I look at the lowest one of these in bullet points, it's talking about GA4GH collaborating and coordinating. Well, there's certainly lots of that going on. But if we look at the other bullet points, and I apologize, I think some people have mentioned that the resolution on these is not necessarily coming through brilliantly for everybody. But it's talking about there being millions of genomes and about them being shared using GA4GH standards. Well, there's certainly a huge amount of data. It's talking about the balance between medical and research genomes. I'm not quite sure if we necessarily are at the stage where there's, the balance has tipped massively in favor of medical genomes just yet. But there's certainly a lot of genomes, and there's certainly a lot of large-scale projects, whether it's things like Terra, Genomics England, or beyond 1 million genomes that are making use of GA4GH standards in that work. We're also talking about data being shared responsibly and securely, which I think we see via projects like EGA. But we're also at this stage looking forward to the healthcare learning system. And if we can move to the next slide, please. I think we can see here that we have succeeded in developing a lot of standards to support all stages of this. It's not complete yet, but there has been huge amounts of progress. And moving to the next slide, please. The sheer volume of work that has gone into this, I think, was really underscored massively last year with the special issue of cell genomics. And not just the marker paper, but actually looking through the huge number of publications that were in there and the vast quantity of work that has gone into it. I think it's sometimes easy for us to forget just how much work has happened to get us to this stage. But it does kind of still leave the question of, okay, we've made a huge amount of progress, but how do we get from here through to essentially Anna and her robots, our idea of this future of seamless federated genomic analysis. So moving to the next slide, please. And arguably, we've already started on this. We've kind of already moved to the next phase in that we're increasingly seeing groups in GA4GH working both on filling the gaps, but also on integrating the standards. On top of that, the standards are only actually going to achieve that future world if they're adopted by people, if they're deployed. And to do that, we need to look at engagement, we need to look at outreach, and we need to look at supporting adoption. So shifting our focus from the initial standards development to actually looking more at how do we see these things in action? How do we move forward to that? How do we face those new challenges? And also for the standards that are becoming more mature, thinking about community building. How do we make sure that we have a community of people with really deep roots into the genomics community and space who are able to maintain these standards and keep them going for the long-term future? Okay, so moving to the next slide, please. So you probably do not need me to tell you that the next few days are likely to be very busy. The schedule will be probably a little bit brutal, but we do really appreciate you making time to contribute to this. The meeting wouldn't be possible without you giving up your time, and we know that your time is precious. And I think for that, it just leaves for me to conclude by saying on behalf of all of the staff team that we very much hope that you will enjoy the meeting and find it productive. So thank you very much indeed. And I think at this point, we now get to move forward. And if we can move to the next slide, thank you. And we're now going to do the Firehose update session. And I think at this point, I have a brief housekeeping announcement to those people who are going to be speaking in the session, who are going to be presenting the Firehose updates. If you're in the room, you will have the luxury of advancing the slides yourself. If you're going to be doing it virtually, if you're online to do this update, then Justina, who is in the room, will be able to advance the slides for you from the laptop at the podium. Okay, so without further ado, first up, we have the EDI Advisory Group. We're going to have Laura give us an update on that. So thank you very much, Laura, and over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Hopefully you can hear me well. So before we move on to the first slide that we have, I just wanted to point out a couple of things that we've been doing lately. We've been working on several different projects, and with the new roadmap coming up, great, thank you, Angela. With the new roadmap coming up, we are looking forward to looking at the efforts that we have and seeing the best ways that the EDI work, both in the REWS group and the EDI Advisory Group, can support the work that the initiatives that we have, as well as increase our impact with EDI work. So I can just see myself. I don't want to see myself. So one thing I wanted to mention is that we have a new page on the GA4GH website that now lists all of the projects that we have, which you may not be familiar with. It's under, it's in the GA4GH website, and it's under how we work. There's now an equity, diversity, and inclusion in GA4GH section. And it includes reflected in our teams and reflected in our standards work, the separation that we have, which includes the EDI Advisory Group, as well as the work that the REWS team is, the REWS equity team, ethics workstream, diversity subgroup is working on, and the projects there. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that. But the thing that we wanted to highlight today is a session that's coming up in just a couple of hours, I believe. So if we can go to that slide. We've contracted, sorry, if you can go to the next slide, perfect. So we've contracted with an organization called Alaria. And Alaria is an equity, diversity, and inclusion organization that does very data-driven insights with focus on impact. So how do you impact the outcomes that you're hoping for by leveraging equity and diversity and inclusion concepts? So Paolo is going to be leading us in a workshop. It's a hands-on workshop. I hope that everybody attends that. He's going to be in Montreal in person, and all of the other pieces of the interactive session will be online. And the goal here is not to really come up with a solution. This is a journey that we're on. It's not something that we can flip a switch and have the impact reflected through inclusion. So what we're going to be doing is continuing on that journey and getting insights from past research that they've done. They work with a number of different industries. There are some trends that they see across all industries. They work with corporate companies, not just in America, as well as professional associations and other groups like GA4GH. So we're looking very forward to that session, and it will be better with more people there. So hopefully you will come to that very engaging session that we're expecting. It's today at 1:15 Eastern, so in approximately 4 hours. Yeah. So that's all I have for our update, and open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And if you do have questions for Laura, I think I can see chat, so feel free to put them in there. We also have Slido, so please do feel free to put questions into Slido. Okay, and I think it sounds like a really interesting session. I'm certainly looking forward to it today, and I think it goes actually to issues that all of our groups face at the moment, thinking about how do we have an inclusive working space, how are we able to build connections with other groups and to support the further adoption and impact of the standards. So I would strongly encourage everybody, if they can possibly make the time to attend that session, to be there, because I think it promises to be really worthwhile. Okay, so thank you very much indeed. It looks like we don't have any questions immediately for EDI, but if we can move then to the Federated Analysis Systems project, and I think Ian is going to be giving us an update on that. So Ian, over to you if you're with us.
All right, thanks, Susan. This is unfamiliar. Is this working? Yes?
You are sounding a little bit faint to me, so I'm not sure if we maybe have a microphone issue in the room.
What is this? Okay, so you just got it. All right, are we good?
Yeah.
Is that better? You can hear me? Okay, thanks. All right, so this is going to be the fire hose update on FASP, or the Federated Analysis Systems Project. I'm presenting, but this is collaboration with Max Barkley and Brian O'Connor, who are co-chairs. So addressing where the Federated Analysis Systems Project fits in relation to the GA4GH strategic roadmap, and it's fairly central to that roadmap. And is mentioned specifically in the roadmap details. FASP, this is, as was mentioned, we're jumping right in with the technical stuff. So no overview here and detail of what FASP is, but it grew out of a cross-workstream initiative, initially between the DURI, discovery, and cloud work streams, with the aim both to go end-to-end with use of different GA4GH standards, but also wide in the federated sense of bringing data together from different sources. So under the heading of improving interoperability, FASP is all about interoperability of GA4GH standards, and we're extending beyond those initial 3 work streams, looking at other standards besides those we started with. And you know, the final point there is that it also uses external standards, where we find that there are standards in use by scientists and clinicians. We make use of those in FASP as well, as a way of seeing what GA4GH standards need to do in addition to what they do already. So in the area of improving implementation support for the technical standards, yeah, the FASP activities prompt the use of the GA4GH standards. They actually get them off the page as standards to through people's implementations. FASP doesn't actually do the implementation, but really makes use of the implementations that people have put up, and provides feedback to work streams and to those who have implemented them. We're also doing things in the area of engaging more closely with healthcare and clinical standards, and that'll come up in a hackathon that's happening as part of this meeting. So where we've got to most recently, I think we shared this slide at a steering committee certainly before, but not everyone would have seen it. We finished up with a hackathon in January or February, which looked at DURS and passport integration, did some work with Data Connect, looked at some of the DURS capabilities around batch operations and pagination, and there are links available to that hackathon and lots of detail documents behind all of those. One of the things that it spawned, we had on the, and this is, you know, extending to other work streams. We originally planned to line up a hackathon item on the computable cohort work that's going on. And so we've taken the FASP approach to hackathons, and that's sort of spawning off into other activities. So that's happening this week. That's not actually a FASP breakout. It's really between discovery and Clin Pheno. The 2 FASP sessions are one on use cases, where we're aiming to identify use case patterns and how to engage and partner with people who have use cases. We're going to be following up on 6 work stream use cases or cross work stream use cases that people have identified. We'd like to see people there with users with a clinical and scientific clinical need, those who are advocating for those 6 use cases that are mentioned. The details of those 6 are all in the agenda. And in general, anyone interested in end-to-end use of GA4GH standards. The other session is a deep dive on DURS, passports, and discovery. This has been an ongoing activity within FASP for, I think, more than a year. We're bringing it up to look back at the original use case, see how we're doing at that use case. This is an example. I'm glad to hear Anna and her robots mentioned. The question here is, would you give your passport to a robot? If you are Anna, would you give your passport to a robot? Or the person who is behind that robot and operating that robot? And is that a comfortable thing that people want to do? So this is, yeah, in many ways, this gets very technical, but we want to bring this up to a higher level and think about things in those terms as well. I want to make a comment here. FASP is not a typical, well, it's not a work stream, it's cross work stream. And because of its role in the strategic portfolio of GA4GH, we have very close involvement from the tech team. So Susan and Jeremy in particular have been very involved in FASP. So that is, I meant to say that right up front, that we as, you know, we come in and join in the activity from our own institutions, but the support of the GA4GH tech team has been central to this. And this, I think everything on here is covered by things that are already in progress. I don't think there's anything that I really want to mention that isn't covered by the activities that we're going to be doing while we're here. Yeah, passports, the AAI subgroup, and going towards the 1.2 release of passports. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Ian. And any questions for Ian? I think we should have a slide here as well. If anybody has any questions.
I'm in the room and happy to give a question.
Yeah, please do.
So Ian, it's great to see the progress, and as you know, I've got a passion to try and bring the kind of analysts, the research analyst community to the party. I feel that they kind of, you know, they just see barriers and not opportunities with GA4GH, and we need to get them over the hump for that. And in my group, as some of you know, we pushed our latest piece of quite sophisticated analysis into what we are describing as a GA4GH compatible Docker. There's an interesting question when I started using those phrases, people said, oh, there's a definition of a GA4GH compatible Docker. And I was like, oh, that's not quite what I was trying to say, but it's an interesting thought process. But one of the things which I'm really aware of is we're pretty confident it works, but we don't use passports because we don't have any implementation where passports are needed for the access. And I think it would be really interesting to drive it to that passport integration as well. And from the client side, it should be just a question of us getting a passport at the start, or kind of logging it, or however you hold it, as you say, is my robot allowed to have a passport? And then running it, but making that practical. So I'm just putting our hand up as an analyst that has made a complex piece of code, DURS and WES compatible. I now want to add passports to it, but we need, this is a request somewhere out there, we need a site that has a reasonable amount of data with a passport implementation that we can interact with. So that's the kind of ask on the other side.
I don't know if there are any virtual or real hands that could go up and say, yes, we have such an implementation, but it would be great to know if there are. But I think making that part of the discussion on Friday, Ewan, would be a good way to move it forward.
Okay, well, thank you both. Unless there are any other pressing questions, I think we'll move forward to genomic knowledge standards. And I think we are going to have Alex Wagner presenting. Alex, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, or afternoon or evening, depending where you are. Yeah, today I want to talk about genomic knowledge standards, our progress with respect to the GA4GH roadmap and priorities identified on that roadmap. To begin, one of the first of such points is the interoperability with other standards and alignment to those. And some of the efforts that we are undertaking over the next year and leading up to plenary are how we can interoperate between Verse and Versatile with Pheno packets. As many of you know, the Verse is part of the Pheno packets 2 standard. And we've recently been working on how to engage with people that are trying to adopt this standard and kind of overcome that implementation gap. So we've created a new repo, Verse Pheno packets, that provides a Python-based introduction to generating Verse objects for use in Pheno packets. And these serve as examples in the Pheno packets practical introduction manuscript, which is planned for submission, I think, any day now. The Verse VCF alignment effort is ongoing. We've identified genotypes as an important area of mutual interest to address the scalability issues in VCF, which is primarily what the VCF group works on, as well as the need to model this in Verse so we can extract and represent that data type. We've also developed some VCF annotation tooling in Verse Python. So Verse Python is our reference implementation for Verse. We're now able to annotate VCF records with Verse allele IDs. Also, Beacon v2, I think I think we're voting on it this session. One of the things they're doing around Beacon v2 is using Verse 121 alongside their historical variation format. The other thing to mention is implementation support. This is the second of the 3 roadmap priorities. We, earlier this year, developed our GKS meta schema. This is basically a way of representing both the semantics and data model in a single source of truth. And we implemented this in Verse 121. So now the documentation for Verse terminology and models is strictly tied to the actual schemas that are developed. Going forward, we're evaluating how we might align this to existing community approaches in this space, including the LinkML standard. We're also working on a maturity model and a data class versioning system in order to facilitate growth of this standard. We're updating the GA4GH computed identifier scheme to accommodate this. It will allow us to do explicit communication of data model maturity, as well as associated plans for version data class resolution. And if you want to get involved in that, our first session for GKS, the stable, the draft, and the trial use, which is a spaghetti Western theme, is going to basically talk to these points. Following this, we're also going to be working on some, kind of getting started tools. So we're working on cloud-based notebooks where you can go and you can play with Verse, but it requires absolutely zero install. You can basically just click a link, get a Python notebook, and just start playing with Verse, generating objects, searching resources, that sort of thing, so that you can get a sense about how it works and learn about it without going through all the steps of building the underlying resources. And then finally, the goal here is public access and no installation. And we're going to take all of this and bring it with us to the ISMB annual conference in July, where GA4GH is hosting a Verse hackathon. I'd encourage anyone that has an interest in participating in this and helping to promote growth, development, and clarification of the standard to consider coming and joining us at that hackathon, which I believe is in Madison, Wisconsin, in the United States. Finally, the third roadmap priority is engaging with clinical standards communities. We have developed a clinical collaborative between the VIC driver project, the Clin driver project somatic working group, and the Cancer Genomics Consortium to get clinical input on a variety of data structures and models that are necessary for representing genomic annotations in the clinical space. This includes the recently published oncogenicity SOP, and we are taking the outcomes from that paper and that work to help us develop an interoperable model with the ACMG AMP clinical standards, and this is part of the efforts of the VA team in GKS. There's also the Gene Fusion Creation Project, which is helping us develop the representation of gene fusions, both in knowledge bases under what we call categorical variation concepts, as well as in assays. And for us to do that, we need to develop a specification for categorical variation, as well as fusion representation. And the VR team is tackling these. We're going to be talking about this subject in our second GKS session today, a fistful of categorical variants, continuing on our spaghetti Western theme. Finally, we're going to look to the SA team to develop regulatory element representations. This is our sequence annotation team in GKS. And this is going to be following the work that they plan to do this summer on gene and transcript representation. In addition, of course, ClinGen is very clinically focused as a driver project. And the ClinGen ClinVar work on the FDA-recognized expert variant pathogenicity statements is part of our ongoing efforts across VA and VR, as are the clinical community submissions from ClinVar. Finally, we're working with HL7 Fire through the Sync for Genes demonstration site in order to basically represent variation entities in Fire and clinical resources using Fire through this program from the ONC, or the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology. So you can find these first two sessions that I referenced. These are both happening today. These are the times they're occurring at. And then we have two more sessions later this week. We've got Hingham High Standards, where our VA team is going to be talking about their development of the variant annotation model, as well as for a few standards more, where it's going to be an open session for GKS subgroups to come and discuss, major leading issues that we want to work on leading up to plenary of this year. All right, with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Alex. And if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to share them either in chat or in Slido. Alex, I was struck by you mentioning the Python notebooks. That sounds a really interesting idea as a means of enabling people to play and investigate verse without doing the installation. What prompted that idea?
So for a long time, we've had Verse Python notebooks available inside the Verse Python repo, but if you want to do any of the stuff like translating from other variation formats, it requires retrieval of reference sequences that require, of course, then underlying platforms and tools. All of this is installable using Verse Python, but the process of doing so, requires several gigabytes of data download and requires you to do a lot of setup in order to do those translations. And we were looking for a way to basically make it much easier for people to use these notebooks, just as a way of trialing the specification, see how it enables you to search resources and that sort of thing. So, of course, Python notebooks are a great way of doing data science and exploration activities, and so we saw it as a natural choice for kind of a community learning platform.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much indeed for sharing that, Alex. Really appreciate it. It sounds like a great idea. And I think next up we have large-scale genomics, and I can see Thomas Keane on a camera, so I'm guessing that maybe Thomas is going to be the person giving us this update. But over to LSG.
Yeah, it's going to be me. I'll talk on behalf of Oliver myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I had mic issues.
I can hear you, but I can't see slides just yet. But I think slides should hopefully.
Right.
We now have slides, and I can hear you. That's great.
Right.
Over to you, Thomas.
Thanks, Susan. It's great to see everyone in this hybrid format, and it's great to see we can get this to work. It's hopefully it'll be good for the next 2 days. Okay, I'm going to try and summarize some of the updates from large-scale genomics. We've got a whole sort of multitude of different task teams, and I will attempt to summarize their work in the next few minutes. On the VCF standards, the good news is we've got a really active maintainer now for the VCF, which is Daniel Cameron. He recently moved to Illumina, so he's now got quite a lot more time to spend on the VCF specification. One of the things that has been hanging around for a while is this 4.4 version of the specification. It's now open for public comment. Link is in the slides. We want feedback. We're giving 6 weeks to raise any additional issues, and then we're going to try and close this one and get this version released. It's been we had to set a deadline essentially. It's been building for a while. The major thing is there's an overhaul of structural variant support in the VCF. So all of the SV fields are now have support for multiple alt alleles. There's things like complex multi-breakpoint genomic rearrangements are supported. And then there's other changes, other sort of changes, but it's all really focused around structural variants, and that's really really come from sort of Daniel's kind of focus in that area in the last number of years. So please, if you have opinions, please have a look at this. Next slide. Then moving on to the RefGet, excuse me, the RefGet team. So one of the major things, I think this will be a really great addition to RefGet, is the ability to support other namespaces as identifiers to be able to look up the reference sequences using those namespace identifiers. You know, examples here is an INSDC identifier, an ensemble identifier, and they have obviously they need to be registered with a sort of recognized namespace organization like identifiers.org. I think this will be a great addition. And then there's a breaking change coming up, and this is really around the full sort of implementation of the service info. I think RefGet came along just before kind of the service info was kind of formalized across the standards. So this will be a breaking change for RefGet, which will probably mean a 2.0, I guess, is really the requirement here. And yeah, and then the moving to a new testbed infrastructure. Hopefully that will be ready for later in the year. Next slide. Then just a bit of a whirlwind around some of the other standards. So the RNA-GET, this is led by Sean Upchurch. They've got new deployments, which is great, which is really what we're trying to see is new deployments of the standards that we've built over the last number of years. So they've got ENCODE and ENCODE DCC and GTEx. There's additional implementations planned by CANDIG and the Common Fund Data Ecosystem for later in the year. And then there's a sort of an alignment with the Data Connect standard and RNA-GET, and trying to get the representation and a table schema draft for use with Data Connect. So that's great. That's kind of more kind of cross standard cooperation. HTS-GET, I guess this is one of our very first standards. So it's kind of again, it's more trying to encourage adoption, and there's not so much happening in the actual standard itself. So we've got a new implementation in Rust, and there's an involvement in the Google Summer of Code. Currently, the applications are being reviewed. So really, HTS-GET is all about adoption. It's one of our very first standards, I think, that we developed. GA4GH, this is the encryption container standard for the large genomic files. There's a new deployment that's going to be live quite soon, I think, by the CRG, who running their EGA node. And it's going to form one of the standards for the upcoming federated EGA network, which will hopefully be launched later this year. In terms of the standard itself, they're looking at key management, because obviously encryption and everything around that is only as strong as the actual key management itself. And then some improvements to assure the sort of whole file integrity, that you can't have parts of a file being sort of swapped out, basically, to make sure that that's covered by the standard. Next slide. The future of VCF, I mean, we really want to see progress on this. It really is becoming, more and more urgent by the week, by the month, really. This is just the whole issue around VCF not being scalable for when you go into the hundreds of thousands, sort of millions of individuals. We were working on, so the current leads is Albert Smith, and we've now got a co-lead for this group, Mallory Freeberg at the EGA at EBI, which is just great to really help Albert with the sort of running the group. One of the things they're working on now is population simulations. There was some, collaborating with Jerome Kelleher on this, there was some issues around the allele frequencies, how realistic they were compared to real data. So just getting that resolved, and hopefully we can really get on with those population simulation tests with some of the proposed solutions, and that may make it into this new VCF standard. So I really want to see progress on that in the next few months, I think. In terms of CRAM, there's now a second implementation of CRAM version 3, which is great, because this was hampering CRAM in terms of moving forward. So this is in Rust, in the Noodles and HTS software package, and version 3.1 hopefully is also being implemented in the Noodles software package. So this will be really great, because we really needed an active second implementation to really be able to move, especially be able to move forward with CRAM version 4. I mean, it's been sitting there as proposal. It's the draft specification. The ideas are all kind of quite hardened now, but we need the implementations to catch up, essentially, so that we can move forward with CRAM version 4. And then just one sort of slightly random point. We had a discussion at one of our recent meetings that was raised by Yossi Farjun, who's moved to I can't remember the institute he's moved to in Canada, but he's starting to work with GWAS data. He was kind of raised a discussion about sort of GWAS data formats, how you kind of mirror all the kind of operations that we do with say VCFs. How do you do those kind of same kind of operations with GWAS results? So we're kind of doing a bit of sort of a landscape analysis, talking to the GWAS catalog, talking to other sort of really kind of large scale GWAS kind of groups and meta GWAS groups, to try and understand what does the landscape of data formats and standardization and tooling look like for GWAS results. So we're going to do some landscaping first, and if there's no need for a standardized data format around GWAS, then that's fine. If there's potentially a need and a desire from the tool developers and the major GWAS resources, then this is something that obviously is quite keen to move forward on. Next slide. And then just a note in terms of the Connect meeting, there's involvement around the testbeds and validation of GA4GH standards session. And that's really looking at the sort of existing approaches to test interop across implementations. So it's relevant to a lot of the LSG standards. Yeah, I think that's it. Oliver, did I miss anything? I was going to know.
Okay. And I think I might also flag, we also have a session on the product development and approval process, which I think actually touches on a few of the things that you spoke about there, Thomas. I think that in the interests of time, I'm going to ask if anybody has questions about LSG to please put them in Slido or in chat, and I'm going to let Thomas and Oliver take those offline. Obviously, we're a little bit late starting, but we're starting to drift a little further off track. But if I could now invite Jan to please give the update for REWS. I think that's the next speaker. Jan, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you very much, Jan.
That's great. It's such a pleasure to be in this hybrid meeting format. It's really wonderful to see some people back in person, but also not to lose all the community worldwide. So let me go quickly, since we're a little bit on time, regarding the REWS agenda for this meeting. So as usual, we aim to develop policies and tools to address regulatory and ethics hurdle to international genomic data sharing. The focus of the meeting will be on future direction of existing work, connecting with driver project, and setting up new projects. We're always interested to hear from the greater GA4GH community. If you have some challenges in your own work streams that you think we can help you with, if you have projects that have a policy dimension, don't hesitate to come and chat with us. Always pleased to hear about new challenges. And of course, everybody is always welcome to join our sessions. So what are we going to do at our REWS General meeting? So the REWS General meeting will be tonight, at 4:30 European Eastern Standard Time, sorry. And the session will really focus on both driver project roundtable, and that will feature the Australian Genomics, EU CanCan, Human Cell Atlas, and EpiShare, which will be giving updates on the ethical and policy side of their project. We'll also be discussing a roadmap. So some projects have been underway for a while, other projects are just starting, and some will start in the next few months, and I'll speak a little bit more to it. We'll also touch base with our people that are working on the GDPR forum, which is, of course, about good tips on how we can do data sharing at the time of the general data protection regulation in Europe. And by the way, there's been a release recently on the forum that's very interesting by Melissa Clin. I invite you all to have a look at it. We'll also have an update on the Genomics Health Implementation Forum. We have one session, also a working session, that's going to take place tomorrow, Eastern Standard Time at 8:15 a.m. or 12:15 UTC. And this is going to be from the genetic discrimination subgroup. Of course, I think everybody knows that genetic discrimination has been a long time challenge, and you know, it's one of the reasons why sometimes individuals are anxious to share their data with large projects in genomics. And so this session is part of the work that the Genetic Discrimination Work Group does to address the challenge of genetic discrimination. And it's going to be focused on really, you know, the definition. What do we mean by genetic discrimination? Because, I mean, it all starts from there. I mean, in terms of protection, in terms of information we provide. So what is really envisioned within these two words of genetic discrimination? And we'll try to get a short paper on clarifications that need to be made to this definition. Everybody welcome to that workshop. It should be really interesting and focus-driven. And regarding our roadmap, so some of the new projects that have just started, so we have the diversity in data sets project that's going to start on the 25th of May, so very shortly. You're welcome to speak to Miley about this project, anybody that is interested, or to send us an email at the general REWS address. And then we'll be discussing about the Ethical Provenance Toolkit. That's going to also meet later in May. That one is Alexander and Miley's also involved in that one. Public Attitudes for Genomic Policy, which is from some of our UK collaborators are behind this one. So you have the dates of all those meetings that are coming up. And two new work groups that have formed are the clinical data sharing and consent that you can come and talk to me about. It's a really timely one. How do we, you know, when we collect information for patient care about genetic variants, for example, how can we then share them possibly for research, and what are the consent requirements, if any? And we also have a newborn sequencing effort that's going to start in early 2023. And we also have our projects that are underway currently, the genetic discrimination one I've mentioned, the DACRIS toolkit to simplify the ethics, the data access review process by the Data Access Committee. And of course, you're all welcome to join the REWS General meeting this evening if you're interested to know more about, I know this is many projects I've just mentioned really quickly, so please do attend the meeting if any of this catches your attention and you'd like to know more. Thank you.
Jan, that's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed for that update. I think that next up we have Cloud. So if you could maybe move to the next slide. I think we're going to have Brian O'Connor presenting. If you do have questions for Jan or want to learn more about the REWS sessions, please do feel free to go ahead and put a question into either chat or Slido. And Brian, over to you for the Cloud update. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So let me go ahead and move to the next slide. In terms of cloud, just for a reminder for folks there and in person and on the call, you know, the cloud workstream is focused on creating specific standards for defining, sharing, executing portable workflows and accessing data across clouds in a cloud agnostic way. So, you know, taking a step back, the APIs that we've worked on over the last several years include TERS for sharing tools and workflows for consistent, portable, reproducible results, WES for executing those workflows and tools remotely on defined data sets, TESS for a lower level sort of individual task execution in remote systems, and DURS for accessing omics data across a variety of cloud storage platforms. All of those APIs, we've had releases over the last several years, and all of them are official standards now and iterating through their life cycle of adding more features and responding to implementers' requests and driver project ideas. So in the last year, we saw, quite a bit of uptake, a lot of DURS servers coming online, which is awesome. We've seen consistent sort of progress on feedback, issues being open, PRs being created. And of course, the collaboration through FASP has been, pretty fundamentally awesome for changing and updating and evolving these APIs. So hopefully that gives you, if you're less familiar with cloud, that gives you kind of a grounding in what we've been working on, the APIs we've been creating. If you could go to the next slide, though, how does that tie into the strategic plan and our plans for this year? We've spent a lot of time looking at our roadmap across these APIs. All of our APIs, we have changes that are in progress, additions, improvements, clarifications, and these represent non-breaking changes. These are not major changes in the sense of needing to, go back to steering committee. This is an evolution of our APIs, and we are trying to make sure that we evolve the APIs without creating breaking changes for folks, since now we're getting good adoption across multiple implementers. But we have spent a lot of time. There's a lot of details in our roadmap. I won't go through the details of each API, but for example, on the DURS side, we're looking at how we add batching operations for performance, how we use pagination, where we use it. We're looking at things like continuing to refine the way that we support passports, making that more efficient in the sense of being able to identify for a given DURS object, what are the passports or visas needed. So these are the sort of refinements that we're working on as part of our 2022 roadmap. And really our goal here is, since we have several APIs kind of happening and being developed concurrently, we're really trying to line up the groups working on these to make sure that we have a release for each of our APIs before the plenary in September. And that means that we're targeting about the August timeframe for the next release of our various APIs. So that kind of leads me to the next slide, which is how are we working together to surface that sort of feedback from implementers. And I would plug Li Peng's workshop on the Cloud API Implementers Workshop that's happening today at 2:45 Eastern Time. And this is a session where Li and others are looking at the API implementers, their feedback, their chance to give direct feedback on what it's like to implement these APIs in the real world. So I think we're really interested in hearing from, of course, implementers there, but also workstream experts, contributors, collaborators who want to hear that feedback from folks. Another session at Connect for Cloud, if you could go to the next slide, is of course our road mapping session. So I alluded to the fact that there's a lot of PRs and issues open that people are steadily working through. This is a great session to come to if you want to help us prioritize those and to give us the feedback that we need, and also identifying champions in the community that can take on certain issues and PRs and try and move them forward with us in time for our next release for these APIs. So again, interested in hearing from implementers, users of these APIs, our workstream experts, contributors, collaborators. And then the final session that I want to point out for Cloud, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, is the collaboration with FASP on passports, DURS, and discovery. So this is what we all love about that FASP effort, is being able to cross-pollinate between groups. And so we've set up a session to look at the use of passports and DURS and discovery together. Wearing my cloud hat here, wearing my DURS hat here, we're particularly interested in diving into that interaction between passports and DURS. How do we resolve which passport or which visa is needed for a given object? That's a high priority. There will be other items that we go through. Discovery we'll talk a little bit about in their slides today. We'll talk a little bit about the focus for their questions that they're bringing to the session. So I think, again, we want to hear from implementers. We want to have you join the call here with FASP. We want to hear from users of these APIs and, of course, our workstream experts and contributors and collaborators. And I think with that, it was kind of a whirlwind tour of what's going on with cloud. Happy to take questions.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Brian. And I think next up we have Clin, Pheno and Melanie. And if you do have questions for Brian about cloud, please do feel free to put them into chat. Brian, thank you very much indeed. And Melanie, it is an absolute pleasure to welcome you as one of our new Clin, Pheno leads to give this update.
Great. Hi, thanks, Susan. Yes, as Susan mentioned, this is my first update as a new co-lead of Clin, Pheno, and it's really a pleasure to be here, even virtually, next time in person. So who are we? The Clin, Pheno group really supports the clinical adoption of genomics. And to do that, we represent and exchange clinical and phenotypic data. And everything that we've done and we will keep on doing is really around those two themes. On the next slide, please. So we've worked extensively on phenopackets, and the paper representing the work done on the phenopacket schema has just been accepted in Nature Biotechnology. This was led by Jules and Peter Robinson, and phenopacket is really a computable representation of clinical data that we can exchange using a shared format with shared semantics. And I know it's really blurry, and I hope you can see on the slide deck that we attach ontology terms to really define the semantics, such as HP ontology terms. Where we're at, we have an ISO draft international standard, which is undergoing final review. And we're focusing activities more towards implementation and dissemination of that new version 2.0. On the next slide, another group of activity under the Clin, Pheno umbrella has been looking at the pedigree. That's really led by Grant and Orion. Pedigree is a format that allows to support representation of relationship between individuals in family and complex and large families in particular. We are preparing for submission of version 1.0 to the steering committees. That's coming soon, and we're really excited. And to support this, we're preparing documentation, example implementation. And again, future roadmap activity are really around dissemination and implementation and supporting the new standard in multiple ways. On the next slide, please. Our newest effort, our newest subgroup looks at computable cohort representation. This is led by Sushil, Ian, Philip, many others. Jordi and Judith have been really involved as well. And this is really about bridging different types of cohort representations. On the left-hand side, a researcher is looking at types of cohort. Do we have cohort capturing blood measurement data? While on the right-hand side, another user is looking at specific level of creatinine in cohort participant to extract a subset of the participants. And the computable cohort representation here in the middle is really around how can we develop a format that will allow us to bridge between those two use cases and represent cohort information in a standard computable way. And you can see this includes linking to vocabulary and mapping existing computational phenotypes and so on and so on. And that leads me to the next item on the next slide, which is the computable cohort representation. The hackathon kickoff will be at the Connect, and Ian will lead that on site. As I said, this is really early on, so this is really a good opportunity for people who are interested in those type of activities, challenges around cohort discovery, extraction, comparative statistic. Can we represent the content of cohorts in a summary statistic way and exchange that consistently? So if that's something that really calls to you at all, do join us for the hackathon kickoff. This will be tomorrow morning Eastern time. And we're really looking at exploring what that computable cohort representation standard could look like. The team has prepared a use case with really great support from the GA4GH tech team. They've chosen a phenotype asthma to really walk all through the steps in the pipeline. And again, if you have any feedback, this is really the right time. We have not yet proposed that as a officially as a product on the roadmap, on the GA4GH roadmap, but that's something we're looking to do. So again, right time to give us any feedback. Thank you.
Okay, Melanie, thank you very much indeed for that wonderful update. And it sounds like it's some really interesting sessions coming up. I think, again, I'm going to ask that any questions for Melanie, please go to chat or to Slido. And we're now going to have a very brief update on security from me. So if you could move to the next slide, please. So inexplicably, David Bernick has chosen Disney World over us. So we wish David a nice holiday. However, he has sent us good news. We have a new co-chair for security in the form of Lucilla Onomikado, who will be joining us. She has incredible expertise in privacy and genomics, and we're thrilled to bits to have her joining us. She has expressed an interest in revitalizing our work around about malfeasance rules, and is really looking to take that forward. So again, we're really excited to welcome Lucilla and to look forward to some new work in security, and also to take a moment to thank JP for her predecessor for his wonderful work. Just a very brief couple of updates from security in terms of ongoing work. AAI and passports, they are getting really, really close to having version 1.2. If you're interested in updates on that, I think Martin Kuba is going to be presenting in a session on the final day. And as we have already heard from a bunch of people, there's lots of work going on around about FASP and passports and looking at integrating things. And again, the good news from David is that we're seeing a number of the major stakeholders who've already adopted passports agreeing on ways forward, which is hugely encouraging. And there's also been the suggestion that come version 2, that at that point we look at unifying passports and AAI into a single specification with DURI. I think the feeling is that this has already happened functionally, so let's just go ahead and do it. There's also interest in risk assessment for software, and they'll be looking at adopting the standard from open software security and building on that. So those are the updates for security. I am not going to pretend to be able to step into David's shoes on that one, but if you do have questions on that, please do feel free to reach out to David. He should be returning refreshed from his holiday in Disney World. So with that, I think we can move on, and I think next up we have discovery, and I think we have Mark going to present for this one. So Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Susan. Hello, everyone. So in addition to the cross workstream efforts that you've already heard about, FASP and collaboration with Clin, Pheno, and computable cohorts, which you've already heard, we have at least 2 priorities that we'd like to advance as part of this meeting. As you did hear, Beacon v2 is up for approval. I can't believe that we're closing in on almost a decade of work on Beacon, but Beacon began in 2014 as a minimal form of discovery, with version 1 being approved a few years ago on the simple premise of answering the question, do you have this variant? Version 2 is up for approval tomorrow, and many new features added to v2 in response to community requests, including range queries, gene queries, and additional filters on subject metadata like phenotype. So, congratulations go out to Jordi Rambla, the Elixir Beacon driver project, and many others who contributed to that effort. Second thread that we're advancing is talking about and exploring the value in creating a registry of standard schemas. So this image tries to articulate a toy example of the problem, in that without standard schemas, it is difficult to perform federated search and analysis, which is really at the core of what we do at Discovery. So Data Connect and Beacon v2 both have the ability to reference standard schemas by URL. And we're now exploring whether there's value in creating a sort of schema registry service that is inspired, at least conceptually, by the tool registry service and the DocStore implementation from the cloud workstream. So this could look like... I think
you're having maybe some possible issues with the audio. I think we're not necessarily hearing you totally clearly.
Sorry about that. I'll move my mic closer. Is that better?
I think that is a little better.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So this could look like an API and UI for publishing, discovering, and referencing standard schemas. It would serve the immediate needs of these discovery APIs, but at the same time, we want to be inclusive about the needs of other work streams who would like to potentially publish their schemas following this registry. So this is in the very early days of exploration. It's not on the roadmap yet, but it's something we're considering. So please do contribute. In terms of sessions that relate to discovery, you've already heard about the testbeds and validation of GA4GH standards happening today. Implementing Data Connect is coming tomorrow, illustrating different levels of data harmonization, trying to address this challenge we have of interoperability between different implementations of Data Connect. So interested in hearing from semantics experts, beacons, schema blocks, and computable cohorts especially. And then on Friday, we have a special session on this topic on standardizing approaches to sharing schemas over APIs. So how can we promote the reuse of our schemas across GA4GH standards and work streams? Exploring ideas for a new GA4GH standards that will enable data model publishers to share their models in a standardized, interoperable, and referenceable way over the web. So interested in hearing from semantics experts, GKS, Clin, Pheno, and drivers with use cases in data model sharing. As Ian mentioned, we're also working on the FASP collaboration on passports, and interested in hearing from data access committee experts, Data Connect, and passport implementers and drivers. So with that, happy to answer any questions live or in chat.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mark. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to again ask if people could please put any questions for Mark into chat. And that leaves us with our final update from DURI. And I think we have Tommy to present that.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you very much, Tommy.
Okay, so this is a short update on the data use and researcher identity workstream and what we are doing on the GA4GH roadmap. So as many of you know, we have two standards.
Tommy, I think we may have lost your audio.
Should I start again?
If you would, I think that might be best. Thank you very much indeed, Tommy.
Okay.
I can hear you clearly now, so thank you.
Thank you for upgrading me to a panelist. So I'm giving a short update on the data use and researcher identity standards on the GA4GH roadmap. So as many of you know, we have two standards, data use ontology and passport. They both have been approved and passport is undergoing an upgrade at the moment. So both of these standards, I think it's quite clear for all the other standards in GA4GH, these cannot exist in isolation. So data use ontology tries to encode the kinds of terms that the original consents have approved for the data use in the downstream data analysis. And the passport is a machine readable way to encode that the researchers are who they claim to be and what types of access permissions on data sets that exist in the distributed infrastructure have been granted for them. So these two things integrate to various other standards on the GA4GH roadmap. And as I said, so they have to be integrated to things like the federated analysis, integrated Dockers and things like that before they become useful. And as such, I think the biggest thing now when we have reached a stable state for the standards is that their uptake should be the priority for the work stream. So we are working with the other work streams, and I'm particularly myself interested in how the original consents that are being asked from the data subjects, the data donors, if they could be turned into machine readable expressions, leveraging the DUO standard and going all the way to a practical technical implementation on a data holder service. So this is obviously a very long path to think about a very large integration itself. But I think this is absolutely necessary if we want to streamline data access and still hold the kind of the principalities of the data terms of access that have been originally discussed in the legal sense. So getting more formality into the whole process, starting from the legal clauses, making them machine readable, leveraging the standards in part that what DURI is working on. It will eliminate bias and noise by human decision making. That probably is one of the challenges in addition to the streamlining the data access process itself. So if this would be in place, I think we could reach these holistic technical integrations with the kinds of things that the cloud and discovery and the FASP colleagues were talking about. I think that currently the focus of the DURI work, so we had the 2 publications of both DURI and Passport coming out with the rest of the GA4GH applications last year. So there's some sort of a plateau in the energy in the work stream, but everybody is interested in the uptake, the driver project uptake of these standards and these holistic technical integrations that you could get things to work from end to end. These are apparently the thing that people are looking for. But the DURI workstream is doing just like these 2 standards at the moment and focusing on making especially the data access committee work more streamlined with the support that we are giving. The next slide, please. So the goals for these sessions that now come in the next 3 days is really to discuss this. Can we stabilize the standards? The standards are supposed to be stable. So if you are going to the uptake, and there would be many uptakers for both Passport and Duo, so can we promise that the standards don't change that much so that the maintenance burden on the underlying ecosystem doesn't become too big? So there have been some changes made to the first version of Passport, and as Susan mentioned, Martin Kuba is going to introduce them tomorrow in a session. So there were comments that we received from the version 1, and I think these have been addressed now, and this is, of course, necessary. But that said, I think stabilizing the DURI standards and discussing about that can we say that this is right? So this is one of the key goals to find out here. We are encouraging the uptake of the standards by reaching out actively to the driver projects. I myself reaching out to Elixir driver project, and we are going to talk about a GA4GH standard implementation in Europe on Friday with the Elixir colleagues in the context of the EU 1 million genomes initiative. So we're trying to do a gap analysis of what it takes to bridge data and workflows from research into healthcare. We are also looking for these cross workstream collaborations always. It's very welcome. And we hope that what we do in DURI would support the data governance and the interoperability, the highest level of the interoperability. So for instance, if we could support processes like how the data access committee review process happens and how the machine readability of the consent forms could be achieved so that they link back to the standard. So these are kind of discussions I would be interested in myself very much. I should mention still that in parallel with the data and workflow gap analysis, there's a parallel session with FASP, but fortunately there are people from DURI attending both of these sessions, but I will be in the gap analysis part. So I will stop there. Thank you for your attention.
Tommy, thank you very much indeed for that update, and really interesting hearing about DURI's thinking about how to integrate the standards to look at streamlining the process of managing and accessing data, and also to hear about the sessions that are coming up. I think we have a very brief moment if anybody has any questions, either for Tommy or indeed for any of our other speakers. Okay, I'm only going to give you a few seconds here because we're almost on time for the end of the session. Okay, so I think in that case, it simply falls to me to thank, first of all of the speakers who have presented on the updates. It's been fantastic to hear about all the work that has been going on. Also, though, to thank all the people who've contributed to the work that has been presented. It's really amazing to see the ongoing progress. So I think that brings this part of the opening session to a close. I think we're now going to have a 15-minute break. For the people in the world for whom it is not a horribly late stage in the day. I'm aware that for some of the people I'm looking at on Zoom just now, it is a dreadful time in the day to be on a meeting. But for those of you who can stick around, we really would love it if you could join us in 15 minutes for the session where we're going to be talking about what future direction, how should we be approaching some of the challenges that GA4GH has. So we're going to close here, and I have it at past the hour, and we're going to resume again at 1/4 the hour. And thank you all very much indeed for joining us and for your attention and for bearing with us with the initial technical glitches where you had 3 copies of me, I believe, on the screen at one point. But thank you very much indeed, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. Thank you.